It's time for my virtual Jericho question time with John Mayer.
Hello, welcome to a very special My Jericho. 42 years ago, I was a humble young researcher, which, believe it or not, I was a humble researcher once, on a program called Question Time, which started in Bristol in April 1979. And look what happened to that. We did 3 programs as a filler, and it's now gone on for 42 years. So tonight, never waste a good format. We're going to do that in Jericho. We've got a star panel for the first one. First off, Councillor Tim Bearder, who's the county council member for highways management. He's in charge of the roads. His predecessor, Yvonne Constance, is also with us tonight. She was his predecessor. She was the woman who closed and opened Walton Street. Thirdly, we've got the Councillor Lizzy Diggins, who is the Labour councillor for Carfax in Jericho. And finally, the new curate of St Barnabas, Rev.Matthew Salisbury, and a very fresh reverend. You've sent us questions, so I will put them by and large, and see where it goes from there. Right, the question to all of you from me. There's a fuel crisis going on. You might have noticed. You might have seen the queues outside petrol stations. It's not just in Oxford; it's all over Oxfordshire. Who's to blame? Tim.
Well, this is such an obvious one for me. I mean, the minutiae of how it happened, one can blame the government or whoever, but it's very clear it's happening in a backdrop of Brexit, and this is the coming home to roost, essentially. I was in a co-op in Southampton on the weekend, and there was just one gnarly old sandwich left in the display, and I turned to someone and I said, this is Brexit writ large. And he said, yeah, but at least I won't have to go to work on Monday when the petrol runs out. But it's not just petrol. It's, doctors can't get vials for the blood tests. We've got shortages across the piece. If you look at the fishing industry, there's disputes with France about who can fish around Jersey, and they're threatening to cut off the electricity there, and all around the inshore waters of the UK. People have yet to show me a positive outcome from Brexit. All I can see is disaster after disaster, and I think we're still in the transition period. Lord Frost has refused to let that roll out, and so we're going to see huge problems in Northern Ireland. We're just at the start of a real disaster for this country. We've lost freedom of movement. We've lost the right to work, marry, and travel across the full European continent, the biggest single market in the world. It's just a disaster from beginning to end.
Okay, Yvonne, you may have a different point of view.
Yes, a very different point of view. The better informed point of view is that actually the problem with freight hauliers is much older than Brexit. And the information coming now from drivers particularly, but even from the haulier industry, is that the pay and conditions that have been offered have been squeezed to the point where only those prepared to work at the lowest possible wages and the worst possible conditions have been willing to serve. Brexit has not made this problem. It predated it. There are very different views about the numbers of drivers who return to Europe. I know the Road Haulage Association likes to persuade the population that it was 100,000. In fact, it's somewhere like 16 seems to be the most agreed figure, but it could be as low as 3,000 to 6,000. The issue is that we have used low-waged EU labour in a number of sectors. In the haulier section, it has been particularly notable because their absence makes a very immediate impression. But in the spirit in which Tim answered this question, we see a problem also in land workers, fruit pickers, vegetable harvesters. The jobs on which we have paid too little do not attract locals who have to meet local tax requirements, local rents, and otherwise. We have lived too long on low-waged EU workers that effectively drove down wages in this country. I do accept that. The haulage industry has known of this for years, predated Brexit, as I have already said, and the chickens are now coming home to roost. I think the current panic is the result of customers responding to, well, it was more than a hint, but to the leak of information about the shortage of drivers impacting the delivery of fuel. And then BP at the weekend closed 100 stations to add a bit of weight to that particular lobbying effort with government. So government has agreed to 3 months visas, which are not going to make a very big difference. They hope up to 5,000 drivers will return. I think they're hoping to attract at higher wages and somewhat better conditions, large numbers of people who have retired or not willing to serve, although they are qualified to do so. It's much bigger, much wider, much older than Brexit. It's about terms and conditions.
Farm, I believe. Is that right?
I am. Yes, this is not an Oxford City problem. The fuel station nearest me is a good 4-mile drive away, and I've now been twice, but I'm not going to waste any more fuel going to find that the queue goes around the block. So I'm waiting for, I'm now linked to any numbers of local friends who are telling me when diesel is available. I might have to get up at 6:30 tomorrow morning to be the first customer on the block. But I also expect it to return to normal when we all have the fuel that we need. We do not need to be filling fuel cans. We do not. I've even had a report of somebody trying to get away with diesel in a plastic bag. I mean, we have gone mad.
Lizzy, who's to blame?
Well, I don't think we can blame the people that are desperately trying to get to work, particularly really concerning to hear reports of key workers of all kinds struggling to get the fuel they need to get to work in hospitals and care settings and otherwise over the past few days. I think there's been a complete lack of planning from the government in the run up to this, and their response has been completely inadequate as well. And we shouldn't end up in a situation where there's sort of 1 or 2 petrol stations open variously in Oxford. And I think there's just been a totally inadequate response, but also, you know, as has been pointed out, a complete lack of forward planning. This didn't happen out of the blue, and there have been wider supply line issues, as Tim pointed out, and it's obviously just completely unacceptable. And I think the government really needs to get a grip quite quickly. And obviously, I think there is definitely there might not be complete shortages of fuel, but there is definitely a shortage of fuel that's getting to the forecourts. And that's something that's obviously having a real impact on people's lives and people not being able to get the fuel they need to get around.
Matthew, do you have a view on this profane matter at all?
Well, it's fortuitous that on Sunday in St Barnabas and in churches all over the country and indeed the world, Christians will read Matthew chapter 6. Which, of course, includes the words of Jesus saying, do not worry about what you're going to wear and what you're going to eat and what you're going to drink, but strive first for the kingdom of God and its righteousness. And what does that mean in this context? For one thing, I think it vitally means that we need to work for a society and a culture in which we don't need to worry about where our finance is coming from. If we're a lorry driver, it means a situation in which people at the co-op, if they see the one packet of toilet roll, they don't snap it up and say, well, what happens if I don't pick this up? We need to think together and collectively about ways of looking for solutions that will benefit the greatest number of people. And panic buying that's caused by bad messaging on the behalf of those who have the public's ear really needs to think carefully about that.
How full is your tank, and have you filled it up this week?
I have a moped, and it's got a full tank, which cost me about £5, but I haven't filled it up since the crisis started.
Okay, let's move on to Jericho matters if we can. Jamie Hartzell, remember him? He sent a question in. His question is anything happening or planned to happen with a low traffic neighbourhood? Tim.
Yeah. So obviously this is something that Yvonne started. Fortuitously, there was a, or you could say fortuitously, there was a sinkhole, and they decided to act and see what, with an experimental traffic order, to see if they could block off the road. So, and then sadly she took it out just as she left office. I believe that we should put something back in. I think fundamentally this administration is about reducing the amount of short car journeys that people take in private vehicles across the city. And I think Yvonne, when she comes to her answer, will probably agree with that stance. We look at the traffic just recently, and that it was being exacerbated by a number of roadworks around the city. But it is chronic congestion, and it's the story, ever increasing story of Oxford, and it's going to really hamper the quality of life of residents who live here. It's going to make our streets less safe and less desirable and amenable to people who cycle, and it's going to reduce economic activity because people are stuck in traffic for hours and hours on end. So we have to look at viable solutions to fixing this, and I think a low traffic neighbourhood in Jericho is one of the facets of that plan. It's not the whole solution, but it needs to be a part of the measures that we bring in to discourage people from using cars for short journeys. So it's very much still on our agenda. We have a very limited pot of money, and it's again something that Yvonne will attest to. The government provides small pots of money with millions of strings attached and timeframes that are ludicrous and make no sense. And so you end up in a kind of hamster wheel, sort of running to their game. And, it's a serious erosion of local democracy when you take away money and any kind of say in what happens locally, because we wouldn't design it this way, would we? We would phase it so that we put in bus gates and low traffic neighbourhoods and everything in timeframes that work for everybody, so that they cause the least amount of hardship for people. At the moment we have some active transport 2 money. We've bid for active transport 3 money. If I put this back up to the top of the agenda, then I have to drop things elsewhere, things that are already almost finished. It'll take officer time away from those projects. So it's high up the agenda, but where we are is not where I'd want to be. We have to do some other things first. But there's some really great ideas.
Tim, Yvonne left you a pot of £52,000. What have you done with that?
Thank you for that question.
So, some of that money has been reallocated. It wasn't entirely for that scheme, and it's been reallocated to other things, other active transport schemes. In actual fact, the government gave us sort of about £2 million. We've already subsidised that to the tune of £500,000 as a council, and still we can't do everything that we want to do in the active transport too, because what we're finding is everything is a lot more expensive and a lot more complicated than it seems when you initially plan these things.
So is that a politician's way of saying you've given it to somebody else, that £52,000?
Yes.
Yvonne,
no.
What should he have done with the £52,000?
Well, I rather hope that the 52,000 was still waiting for a solution in Jericho. I'm very pleased to hear that it's still on the agenda, because I did not abandon it. I was just determined at the stage at which I had to make a final decision, because the experimental order ran out, that the local residents should find a solution that worked for them. I do think, and Tim is right to remind us, that we took advantage of the closure of Walton Street to repair the sinkhole right all the way under the street. And in fact, the street had been closed for something like 7 months when it was put to me that it was such an advantage for the Walton Street area, for Jericho, that we should really continue it. And I do accept that it was a mistake to continue it without the tedious process of months and months and months of planning and consultation. But these were early days, and I took careful advice from officers that an experimental order would effectively operate as an open consultation. People would be able to respond at any stage and throughout the period. And of course, as soon as the closure became permanent, sadly, the neighborhood broke into factions, really, effectively north and south. The benefit seemed to be for those residents in the south. The disbenefit of more traffic using the residential streets to exit, not to enter, but to exit the area, was unacceptable to those streets. And in the middle were the traders, who were quite convinced that the closure of the street was their problem, though I fully suspect it was the pandemic. I accept two problems. One was that we didn't
interrupt if you can, Yvonne. Yes,
yeah,
Jim.
can I just come back? It's not to say that the £50,000 has been reallocated or given to another scheme. It's just that it doesn't get us across the line. The £50,000 is not enough to pay for what's required in Jericho, and I would also have to reallocate officer time, which would cost money, and fetter other schemes. So it's not that there isn't money still put aside for Jericho. It's just they won't get us across the line now. And I would say that you have to be bold with these schemes. I mean, I'm not saying that Yvonne wasn't. She did put in the Cowley LTN, and that's a bold thing in of itself. But we need to stay resolute, and we need to see them through to the bitter end. And if you try and get everyone in a full agreement, you end up making a racehorse by committee, and you end up with a camel. You have to have a vision, and whilst bring people with you and get them engaged in the process of designing the scheme. You can't have vetoes and that deter us from the end goal, which is to reduce car travel.
Yvonne,
that ambition is entirely shared. I would not have launched the LTNs in Cowley, let alone Jericho, without having the same conviction that you have about congestion. Congestion is destroying life and work in Oxford City. And I don't have any sympathy for those who think we sacrifice everything to the convenience of motorists. I just don't. I think through traffic is, in the end, the one target that we really do have to remove, not persuade, because they won't be persuaded. We have to remove by action out of the city. And I'm very pleased to see that post the attempt on Jericho, the local consultation group the two major factions have at least agreed that they do all want a solution to excluding through traffic. Your problem about indicating that you would just run ahead with something in Jericho if you had the funding, and I think 52,000 could go quite a long way, is not knowing what yet to do that would be acceptable to them. In Cowley, there was time, and a lot of time was given to a tremendous amount of consultation of the residents, at least. I don't think we consulted sufficiently the businesses and those on the boundary streets. So we did get howls of disapproval from them. But as you pointed out, we had funding that had to be spent we had to send the bid within 6 weeks, and we were supposed to spend within 3 months. The government did effectively and eventually extend that a bit. But those issues don't help. I did keep the Jericho LTN open for a final 6-week period, and in order to win funding as part of Active Travel Part 2, Tranche 2, and 52,000 was provided for it. In the end, I came to the conclusion that I think the best solution for Jericho will be some kind of traffic gate outside the area to restrict traffic into the area from the Hyde Street, Worcester Street, and only to residents or some such selection, because almost everything else simply imposed the problem of well, admitting traffic through the other entries, and there was no effort for it to get out. So if you limit what comes into the area and give them exit on all the streets, you'd actually probably get the best solution. But we had neither the funding to do that nor the power to do that, because you can't impose an APNR system except where there is a bus route. I see the latest report that I've read on Jericho is there's a proposal to bring back bus 17. Brilliant. Bring back bus 17, use a camera system to reduce the through traffic and the unnecessary entry into that neighborhood, and you'll even get the pick-me-up to work again. I think the service of buses is hugely improved by reducing congestion.
Lizzy, you're almost a spectator to this. What went wrong in Jericho? I mean, some people say the Labour councillors were too much spectators and not active enough. What should be done?
They didn't support.
So I think we were really clear in that we didn't want the closure in Walton Street to be removed before there was any mitigating measure introduced to replace it. So I think it's really disappointing that what did end up happening was exactly that, sort of the barrier just being removed and then nothing being put in place to alleviate any of the congestion or traffic problems in the area, because you then see an increase in air pollution locally and congestion and rat running and those sorts of things. I think another thing that we hear a lot on the doorsteps is concern about the lack of adequate consultation and the fact that people feel like it has divided the community. And I think it is really good that the community is coming together again and trying to sort of heal some of those divisions, but also come up with a solution that, even though we're probably not going to come up with something that works for literally everyone, at least we get to a compromise where we are tackling the problem that I think everyone can acknowledge that there is. So I think in that process, yes, I think we have made a conscious decision to step back and not completely wade in as local politicians and try and lead that, and let that be something that the community comes together to do, because I think that's a lot more effective and important that it's led by them. But I think if we're taking a bit more time before we implement another solution, it's really important that that time is used for proper consultation of local residents and then getting something on the table which, as I said, people can get behind and they feel like it's something that they can have local ownership of as a scheme. I think something like a traffic gate or a bus gate, particularly just outside the area and potentially around the Worcester Street area would work probably very well. But I think having nothing in place now to mitigate the problems locally isn't great. But it's the situation that we're in, so we need to move forward and make sure that everyone's properly consulted as we move forward.
I'm surprised you said that politicians shouldn't take a lead. Shouldn't local politicians lead? Isn't that why we elect them?
Well, I think I've been elected as a local representative to represent people's views on the local council and make sure that we are leading on sort of these important principles of reducing traffic congestion and tackling the climate crisis locally. But I think particularly in this case, we've had a situation where people feel like they've had decisions imposed on them and haven't been properly consulted on something that really affects them. So I think in that situation, you need to allow people to have that conversation amongst themselves. And then when that conversation has been had, which I think we're getting to that point now, then obviously it's really important for local representatives and politicians to then take a lead and take those steps forward. But I think in terms of working out what the community wants and working out how to heal some of the divisions that have come in place because of the Walton Street closure and the way that it was implemented, I think it's really important that if those conversations are being had, that we're not sort of overly interfering in those.
Matthew, you've got a scooter eye view of all of this. What's your view on the low traffic neighbourhood?
I'd really welcome, like Lizzy, some more sustained and genuinely empirical consultation of both people who live in Jericho, but also people who come into Jericho to work, people who work at the college, people who work at the press, people who use or work in the businesses that are affected by the low traffic area. It's obviously a decision that we need to get right, but that conversation needs to include not only the people who live in physical Jericho, but also those who might come and spend money in it, and who make their living in it. And I think those are absolutely crucial issues. And I'm sure we'd be delighted to welcome people to community meetings in one of the biggest buildings with a roof on it, down on Coddigan Street.
Yeah, where do we go from here, all of you? I mean, are we shutting the stable door and the horses long bolted? There'll never be an LTN in Jericho, surely. Tim?
No, that's not true. There are other measures coming on board. We got the zero emission zone, which when that takes effect, will effectively close off, as Yvonne sort of was suggesting there, the entrance from the end of Walton Street and Worcester Street. And you won't be able to exit out of there either, because when that expands, you will be charged if you exit out of there if you're in anything other than a zero emission car. So there's that measure. Then there's other measures like connecting Oxford, which is bus gates that are going to be put around the city, and that will make it harder to get actually into the city centre with private cars. But I think, they are still a way off, and we're working as hard as we possibly can to make them expedited. But I think in the short term, we still need to aim for some kind of modal filter in Jericho, so that it's not a rat run that it is currently.
Now you've got another 4 years in office, correct? Maybe 4.5. What's your legacy going to be? Is it going to be an LTN?
One LTN? No. I mean, if you look at well, I think we need to, as I say, go way beyond one LTN in Jericho. There will be the zero emission zone in the centre, which will hopefully expand further out. My legacy, I hope for it to be a completely transformed Oxford landscape, and so that car isn't king, and we're not all suffering with dangerously polluted roads and sat in traffic. So, this is just, as I said at the beginning, just a facet of the wider picture of controlling traffic in Oxford and making it more cycle and active transport friendly and better for the bus. People need to return to using the bus services, because if we do not do that, we'll lose them. We've got a hugely ambitious bid in for Zebra, which is the zero emission regional bus area. And that's one of the biggest bids in the country, which will see our entire bus fleet that operates solely within the within the Oxford transport area. That's everything from Kidlington to Kennington, Wheatley out to Botley, will be replaced by electric buses. That will be a huge impact. And then when they're in the city, we have to make them travel around at ease, efficiently, quickly, and so that will require lots of other measures as well. So there's so much work that needs to be done, and so much that we're pushing on with, which could be transformative to Oxford.
Can I just throw in there that I think your decision last week is going to be one of the most transformative, Tim, and that was the decision to extend the residence parking zones. There were certainly 13 ready to go when I stepped down. I'm not too sure how many you made last week, but actually to reduce the effectively commuter parking on residential streets will reduce the numbers of vehicles coming into the city more effectively even than charging. And I think with the reduction in traffic, you'll find LTNs become more acceptable. You won't get the same level of dispute and complaint about the change, because the numbers of vehicles will be lower. So I think you're in a very good position. I left you with a great opportunity to make the changes that I saw for Oxford City as well. And congestion management will follow zero emissions. I think we're starting that in February. That's only 5 years after I first agreed to do it. But I think congestion management, if you stick to the Eastern Corridor, you'll be able to get that in pretty quickly, well, in 2 years, and you will start to see a transformation of the city.
And why I believe we are in an excellent position is because we now have an administration that has the will to do it. For the best will in the world, I know Yvonne was really working hard behind the scenes, but had a party behind her that weren't absolutely committed to this. And it needs absolute commitment, because this is not widely popular. But we've got Labour, the Greens and the Liberal Democrats working with a unified vision to really transform Oxford. And it's going to need that political will to make this happen.
a party with knife in the back. But let's move on if we can. A question from Councillor James Fry, not a local councillor, but a near local councillor. He says it's the surveys of actual and potential bus users. It's clear there's a strong desire to reinstate regular bus services, notably the 17 through Jericho and up Kingston Road to Summertown. Where does the funding of bus services fit into the county traffic plans? Are you going to bring back the 17? Tim?
Well, we are on the verge of submitting our bus improvement strategy, and we have to look in the round at how we use the very limited amount of money. So the government that said, Boris Johnson said, you won't even have to look at a bus timetable, they will be so regular. In reality, he's provided £3 billion to the entire country, £29 billion to road maintenance and upkeep and new construction. And then from that £3 billion, he's top sliced off all the zebra schemes, these electric bus schemes that I was talking about. And then pro rata, Oxfordshire could be expected to get about £25 million over 3 years. And that doesn't really give us much money at all. But what we have done is we have put in a really ambitious bid for about 50 million. I say put in, it hasn't been put in yet. We've got more discussions on that. It's got to go to cabinet and everything. But our ambition is about 50 million. That's where we're looking to go with this. And that is really ambitious because it has to connect in to the round with this Connecting Oxford, with this zebra bid, the electric buses bid, so that we can actually make all this happen, because buses are absolutely critical to this city and the wider Oxfordshire. We have to have modal transport hubs around our market towns so that people don't have to drive to car parks on the outside of Oxford. They can come from buses as the beginning and end of their journey. They might cycle to the transport hubs in their towns and then use the bus to get into Oxford. The buses are absolutely crying out because people are not going back to them post-COVID, because we're in this terrible situation where they stopped using buses, they're in cars in front of the buses, and now they see the buses caught in traffic. And so we've got this no man's land where actually if they all got back on the buses, and each bus takes about 75 cars out off the roads, they all got buses back on the buses would travel smoothly. But then they're not. It doesn't make it's not efficient for one individual to do that. And so to try and get everyone out of their cars back into buses is a huge challenge. But buses do sit at the heart of everything we do, and we're looking very carefully at 17.
A Lib Dem MP, Lizzy, 3 buses have been tried in Jericho. 3 buses have failed. How's it going to work?
I mean, I think this is, as Tim says, one of the big challenges that we face. And I think it links back to the points we were making around low traffic neighbourhoods as well. They can't be used. None of these things can exist in isolation. Then it needs to be part of a wider transport and very ambitious transport strategy for the whole city. I think we need to be going on sort of all cylinders on this, but it has to be strategic. I think, for example, low traffic neighbourhoods aren't an end in themselves. They're one tool that we've got in the toolbox to tackle the climate crisis and air pollution locally. I think having a brilliant integrated public transport network is another one, but I think where national government is throwing up barriers in the forms of how they're administering these grants or how or not providing adequate funding to do so, that's something sadly that we don't have control over locally, apart from campaigning on it or making sure that we're making best use of the funding that is available. So I think it is, again, that challenge and that tension between what's being made available, what the government rhetoric is around it, and then what we can make possible on a local level. But I think we have to be ambitious and make it